Hello my friends. This is a look in the dark, chapter 12, the first part, and chapter 12 is called Checkout. Remember, Danny Green and Carol have been detained by the IRA for questioning because they were suspicious of what they were doing with binoculars about the borderlands of Tyrone. Back in Frome, Somerset, Sue was rereading the letter from her mother received earlier that morning. She was especially interested in the last line. Your dad says to tell you that he is really proud of you. Well, she thought, at least the family rift is healed again. By the time of the cheese and tomato sandwich that she prepared for her lunch, she put the letter down and gave attention again to the last sheet of Stanhurst's records that she had decoded. It concerned one Ivan Nistosh, who was a supplier of Vulpes carna, that is the Blandford fox. A supplier, that is, not of the live animal but of its pelt. Having looked it up in one of the Green's mammal textbooks, she found that it was a rare creature of certain parts of the USSR, though there was also an isolated population in Israel. It was described as a small furred fox, being black above and white below, and it had a dark tip at the end of its bushy tail. As Sue looked again at the illustration in the book, she grew red in the face and anger in her chest. She saw that Stanhurst and Nistosh had supplied a number of such pelts, and Carol prayed a somewhat aggressive prayer that Danny and Carol would bring this evil to an end. Had they known that Sue was praying, both of the Greens would have felt most grateful for their young friend's petitions. Carol was in a room on her own and was bound hand, literally one hand, and both legs. She was lashed to a large old iron bed and also to a large cupboard. She had to, even in her distress, admire the skill of the young Republican volunteer who tied her up. Despite being reasonably gentle and leaving one hand free, she could only sit on the wooden chair between the cupboard and the bed. She could move her feet about 2 inches, and her bound hand was behind the chair, and she couldn't reach the knots with her free hand, even if she'd been stupid enough to attempt freedom through that window. It was across the other side of the room, and most of the daylight was blotted out by the thick but ancient green curtains. The room smelled very damp, like a cave, and she seriously doubted if anyone had slept in the bed for a long time, though it did have a mattress and a couple of old blankets that in the half-light seemed to be brown. On the floor was a copy of the Roman Catholics and Martin's magazine. Carol couldn't reach it with her free hand, and she could only make out the title because she had seen copies before, but she was pretty sure that it was an old copy, maybe lying there for years. Carol was praying too. Her prayers were that her husband was not, because of his limited experience of Ireland, making up some story so as to protect the investigation. She knew that the IRA had an agenda of its own, and any uncheckable story could lead to their deaths. She had no need to worry about Danny and his story. He was operating right now on the basis that he and Carol were the most endangered species he knew. His main objective just now was to preserve the Greens. He had assumed that he was a captive of the IRA, and he felt that the worldwide scope of the operation would not be damaged by his telling the truth to these men if he and Carol survived. The masked man in front of him did not have a gun in his hand any longer, but the third paramilitary stood close by with his gun. Yet somehow Danny felt it was a little less menacing than before. Perhaps it was the tone of the voice of the interrogator, which instead of barking orders had become more civil. The questioner spoke again. So you say you're a writer called Danny Green? That checks for your driving licence. But that's not who you are. You need a good explanation for why a Brit writer is snooping around on the Irish border. Writers are not usually stupid, and you know this is not like a Scottish border. I'll tell you if I can trust you men to keep it to yourself. Do you hear that, Pat? Both men laughed. Do you see that weapon in Pat's hands? He didn't buy it on the toy counter in Wars, you know. You're in no position to tell us to keep anything to ourselves. I like your bravery, but I do not have much time for your lack of judgment. Answers now. That is, if you value your life and that of your friend in there. Danny felt like he'd just poked a rattlesnake with a stick. My wife. Okay, I'll tell you the story. And he did. Danny, in as much of a verbal précis as he could, told his interested Republican audience the truth. He named the names of his accomplices, but he did not name Stanhurst. The commander of the IRA Active Service Unit listened for the 15 minutes it took Danny, stopped and stared into his eyes peering out of the mask. He waited while the two men exchanged glances. How hard it was to gauge reaction when faces are covered. So you expect me to believe this story, do you? No, I expect you to check it. As a Brit, snooping about in my country, you've no right to expect anything. That's true, but I do believe what my wife tells me about you. And what's that? That the Provisional Irish Republican Army usually checks people out before it shoots them. Danny deliberately used the full title of the organisation as a kind of respectful flattery. It reminded him how he had flattered his old headmaster once to lessen the wrath and trouble that he was in. Who said anything about the IRA? The political geography of the area does. Huh. What does any English writer from Somerset know about Irish political geography? Not much, if I'm honest, but I'm happy to learn. And we're happy to learn how you crazy animal story fits in with you prowling around at Michael O'Connor's farm. I hope Mr. Connor is not a friend of yours. He's probably more a friend of ours than you are. Come on, we've not got all day. Michael O'Connor is involved in the illegal wildlife trade. Oh yes, and what does he sell? Tyrone tigers? Bears? Hen harriers, for one thing. Hen what? Hen harriers. Mean anything to you, Pat? Pat shook his head. Listen, I might not know about the politics of this area, but I do know about the birds. A hen harrier is a bird of prey. They're breeding not far from where you picked us up. But it's not just the harriers. O'Connor claims he can get hold of all manner of raptors. Raptors? Birds of prey. Does it matter? Oh yes, it matters. You two love Ireland, don't you? You give your life for it. Michael O'Connor is stripping the wildlife for this land that you love to line his own pockets. Birds, dead, stuffed, or alive, eggs, chicks, adults, all being shipped out of the country so that wealthy collectors can pay him big money. The British may have raped your country in the past, but people like O'Connor are raping it now. I'm not sure about you, Daniel Green. Not sure at all. Check me out then. How? Danny looked into his captor's eyes. He realised that he had no idea how they could do that. Can I think about that? Right, Pat. Get him out of here and get the girl in. Make us all another cup of tea. The third man untied Carol, and as the two passed each other, Danny said, I just told them the truth, Carol, all except the name of the man who we want to. The third man pushed his gun into Danny's face. Shut it, right? The interrogator's voice barked from the living room of the old battered farmhouse. Don't tie him up, Liam, just watch him, and if he tries to get out, blast his head off. Liam put the ropes down and invited Danny to sit. Danny wondered how old Liam was, but the mask left few clues. The voice sounded young, too young to be mixed up in this, he thought. But then he remembered how young some of the British soldiers were who carried their arms around the streets of Northern Ireland. Pat arrived with 2 cups of tea. We have a writer here, Liam, and an international investigator of wildlife crime. Are you famous, Danny? Danny smiled at the way Irish curiosity found its way in no matter what the circumstances. Not really, but I do write regularly for a couple of magazines. Do you now? Liam winked at Pat. Can we all have your autograph? All 3 men laughed, and all 3, if honest, welcomed the slight easing of tension. Pat went back to the kitchen to take tea to his officer in command and to Carol. Liam had a firm hold on his automatic weapon, but his voice was more casual. How important voices became when the masks were on. So what do you know about republicanism, Danny? Not much. What do you know about the wildlife trade, Liam? I'm more concerned about the freedom of Irish people. Irish men and women ensnared under British rule. Tell me about it. So, Danny's been interrogated. His story has had some effect, But how can they check his story out? Danny hadn't got a clue. But now Carol's being investigated. Will she make it possible for these borderline RA fighters to go and check out whether the Greens are telling the truth about the investigation they're involved in? Will it make any difference? The next episode throws a bit more light on this. Thanks for listening, friends, and may you all be healthy and happy and peaceful. Bye for now. Bye bye.